Welcome to baseball seasons 1975. Agents of Change.
Go crazy, folks! Go crazy!
The decade of the 70s would see America face a monumental series of events that would shake it to its core. By 1975, the mighty U.S. had failed to achieve its goal in Vietnam. Watergate, the greatest political scandal in American history, had led President Richard Nixon to resign in disgrace. And stagflation, the twin terrors of runaway inflation and job losses, had ravaged the economy. The 60s had been a decade of seismic change. The 70s suffered the massive aftershocks.
Those were, pretty volatile times in general. I mean, the mid-70s, and the whole world was changing, and Major League Baseball began to change too.
And the changes weren't subtle. The American League added a designated hitter to bat for the pitcher in 1973 in an attempt to create more runs. The National League, however, resisted.
You're going to adapt the hitter pretty soon.
No, we won't.
Have to.
No, we won't.
Works too well.
No, it doesn't.
A few of the quaint old baseball parks remain, but many had been replaced by huge modern cookie-cutter stadiums with synthetic turf and high-tech scoreboards. And some teams began to outfit their players differently as well. For years, players customarily wore white at home and gray on the road. But by the mid-70s, tradition was out and color was in.
I once saw a picture of Brooks Robinson, the Hall of Famer, wearing an Orioles uniform that was orange with black trim. Bad idea. But the Astros really took the cake when they wore an off-white uniform with a tequila sunrise motif. You had oranges, you had yellows, reds, and if you stared at it long enough, you could go blind.
But when it came to fashion faux pas, the uniforms of the '75 Indians stood out.
So we saw the red tops. Yeah, cool. And then there's red pants. And you say, well, we're all red? And they said, yep, we're going with the all red uniform.
It was the ugliest uniform in baseball ever.
But it wasn't only the uniforms that looked different.
Prior to the 70s, I think if you took a picture of players in baseball, they all looked alike. They were clean-shaven, basically. And all of a sudden, a group up in Northern California came onto the picture, the Oakland A's. And they started growing mustaches and beards and wearing their hair longer. They were the ones that started the hair movement in baseball.
Ironically, the hair movement was started by a clean-shaven, balding, middle-aged man with no facial hair. He was the eccentric owner of the Oakland A's, and his name was Charlie Finley.
In 1972 at spring training, Charlie Finley, told us that, he was going to give us $300 on opening day if we had mustaches.
And the A's grew them. And soon after, there was hair everywhere in baseball. But the A's were more than just fashion trendsetters in the 70s. They were a dynasty, winning the World Series in 1972, 73, and 74. They became only the second franchise in baseball history to capture 3 straight titles.
The Oakland A's are the first team since the New York Yankees to win 3 World Championships in a row.
The Oakland A's were not only bold and brash, but also completely merciless on the ball field.
They were such a tough bunch that if you threw $1 at home plate, every one of them would kill each other trying to get to the dollar. It was just, they were that competitive.
There was little question that the A's were both feisty and flamboyant. But there was a lingering sense among the players that they were underpaid and underappreciated by their owner.
I was making $29,000 in 1972, and we won the World Series. And I saved 2 games and won 1 game, and he sent me a $1,000 raise. So I called him up, and I let him know what I thought of his raise and slammed the phone down. And that was more or less the way most of the ball players were with Charlie when it came to negotiating a contract.
Ultimately, Finley's tight-fisted ways undermined the team. For when he failed to fully honor Catfish Hunter's contract after the 1974 season, one of the game's elite pitchers became baseball's first real free agent.
The breach of contract ruling has made Hunter the envy of all players. He can negotiate with any team he likes and demand anything he thinks they'll pay him.
The A's unquestionable ace was coming off his 4th straight 20-win season and a Cy Young Award. His availability on the open market set off an unprecedented bidding war.
When I was negotiating, I couldn't believe some of the figures that was coming out. I said, these guys are crazy. I said, but as long as they keep offering the money, I'm going to keep, come on, bring some more.
On New Year's Eve 1974, Catfish signed to play for the New York Yankees. By inking Hunter to the richest contract in baseball history, the Yankees' intrepid owner, George Steinbrenner, sent shockwaves through the sport.
George was quite unpopular in the ranks. The old guard in baseball was offended, and people were aghast. They were horrified.
But the owners would soon have to worry about more than the Catfish Hunter contract. In 1974, Andy Messersmith had pitched brilliantly for the Los Angeles Dodgers. But after that season, Messersmith and the Dodgers couldn't agree on a contract for $75. Messersmith would then approach Baseball Players Association leader Marvin Miller for advice.
He wanted to know what his rights were, and so we told him, they can renew your contract without your signature. They can even cut your pay, but they can only do that once. And at the end of the year, it is our position that you're a free agent and we'll have to file a grievance and win a decision to do that.
Messersmith boldly decided to play the '75 season without a contract and later test baseball's sacred reserve clause, which bound a player to a team for his entire career. In doing so, he and Miller would attempt to bring the possibility of free agency to all players and change baseball forever.
We were in uncharted waters because anybody that had tried to go through free agency was actually squashed, almost never heard from again.
Meanwhile, halfway across the country, there was another group of players who were looking to change their destiny. They were the Cincinnati Reds. They had been baseball's bridesmaids during the early 70s, and in 1975, they looked to finally grab the bouquet. Entering the 1975 season, the Oakland A's, owners of 3 straight World Series titles, may have been the team to beat. But in the National League, the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates were 2 teams who had the personalities and the firepower to unseat them. Known as the Lumber Company, the Bucks had spent the early 70s bludgeoning NL pitching, winning 4 Eastern Division titles and a World Series in the process.
The Lumber Company, they knew they were getting their hits. They knew they were going to score runs. It was that confidence because they weren't going to get shut down.
This relentless attack was led by all-star hitters Manny Sanguinan and Al Oliver, as well as their perennial MVP candidate, the intimidating slugger, Willie Stargell.
I mean, he had this wind up into his swing, and he'd get that windmill going, and he could hit it to the moon, and oftentimes did.
And in 1975, Willie had an imposing new teammate.
They had this young kid, 6'5", about 225, was probably one of the best-built kids you'd ever want to see.
In Dave Parker, Pittsburgh had a young star with incredible potential. The 5-tool talent would begin to help the Pirates continue their reign at the top of the National League East in 1975. But when it came to an all-out attack, even the Lumber Company would have to take a backseat to the Cincinnati Reds.
These guys could beat you with speed, and they could bunt a ball. They could just do a lot of things, and then all of a sudden, boom, 3-run homer. They were scary.
Cincinnati was reverentially referred to as the Big Red Machine.
I don't know who named it, but whoever did, they named the hell out of it because it was a machine, and they wouldn't run over you.
The driving forces propelling the Big Red Machine were players Tony Perez, Pete Rose, Joe Morgan, and Johnny Bench. These 4 were not just stars, but game changers, and none had more of an impact than Bench.
The scouting report said, don't run on John Bench's arm. Running was going to be taking your life into your hands.
Bench's throw right on the button. Don't run on him.
The other thing that Johnny Bench did that most catchers did not do was hit. I mean, not only hit, he hit for power, he drove in runs. He just became an offensive weapon.
By 1975, Bench had already led the National League in RBIs 3 times, home runs twice, and won 2 MVPs.
If you have to pick at every position one great one, Bench is the greatest catcher that ever lived and ever will live.
While Bench's talent made him the game's preeminent catcher, Pete Rose's intangible qualities made him an icon for all of baseball.
There was an intensity level that Pete brought to the ball game that was unparalleled. Nobody else played the game as hard as Pete Rose.
Known as Charlie Hustle, Rose had tangible measures of his greatness as well. By 75, he had already led the NL in runs scored, hits, and batting multiple times, and had also won an MVP. But when it came to versatility, even Pete had to look up to Red second baseman, the 5'7" Joe Morgan.
Joe Morgan was a defensive asset up the middle and a number 3 hitter and a home run threat, and could knock in 100 and score 100 and steal 50.
The final member of the Big Red Machine's imposing quartet was the often overlooked Tony Perez.
Tony is the last of the 4 guys you might think of in terms of popularity or fame, but Tony Perez was the guy that the opposition feared the most because no one really wanted to face Tony Perez with the game on the line.
The 75 Reds were stacked, and it wasn't just their big 4. They also had a Gold Glove center fielder in Cesar Geronimo, an emerging hitting star in Ken Griffey, and an all-star and Gold Glove shortstop in Davey Concepcion. But despite their overwhelming talent, the Reds had yet to produce a championship, and previous failures in the postseason had begun to weigh on the team.
There was so much pressure on guys at the time because in 70 they got beat by Baltimore, in 1972 they got beat by Oakland, 73 they'd been beat by the Mets in the playoffs. And so 75, this was a team that everybody was starting to label as the best team to never win it.
In early May of 75, the Big Red Machine was mired in mediocrity. Hovering at the 500 mark, they were weighed down by expectations and an inability to score runs.
Sparky called me in the office. And he said, Pete, we got to get some offense. I said, Sparky, I'm leading the league in hitting. What do you want me to do? He said, I want you to change positions. You know, here as a guy, I've been in the All-Star game in the outfield for many years. I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to play third base. I said, when? He said, Friday. And this is Tuesday.
When Sparky asked his fearless leader to change positions to make room for a reserve outfielder named George Foster, it seemed like a strange move, to say the least, but it proved to be a stroke of genius.
George Foster became one of the greatest power hitters in that era. You know, he was like Bench and Perez. I mean, he was an RBI guy, home run hitter, and Rose was still Pete Rose. I mean, he played the game the same way at third as he did in the outfield.
Swung out a bouncing ball. Rose cuts it off, throws to second. Boy, I'll tell you, fine play right there.
The lineup clicked instantly, and the Big Red Machine began firing on all cylinders. As they seemingly scored runs at will, they won an incredible 41 of their next 50 games.
You know, we were an offensive juggernaut, man. It's hard to face a team like that.
By the All-Star break, Cincinnati had raced out to a 12.5-game lead in the National League West. The Big Red Machine was running smoothly, and fans in Cincinnati were hoping that this year it would finally continue to do so right through October. 1975 would become known as a year of powerful teams and of powerful change. It was the year that Frank Robinson became the first African-American manager in Major League Baseball.
I know that my every move is going to be watched and checked, where other managers are only second-guess in certain situations.
But there was no second-guessing Robinson, as the player-manager hit a homer and led his Cleveland Indians to victory in his historic debut. American League teams were hoping that Robinson's achievement would signify change in more ways than one. For 3 years, the A's had ruled baseball, but in 75, they would be forced to defend their crown without their ace, Catfish Hunter.
He was a big game pitcher. Catfish was, you know, if you wanted to win a ball game, all the guys I ever played with, I would hand the ball to Catfish Hunter.
Catfish brought his big game prowess and his big contract to New York, and he began winning with the Yankees as often as he did with the A's. But the Yanks could still not measure up to the Baltimore Orioles, who had won 5 of the previous 6 AL East titles. The Orioles were known for their dominance on the mound, headlined by right-hander Jim Palmer. Going into '75, the Orioles ace had already won 20 games 4 times and captured a Cy Young Award.
If you were the opposition, you knew what I was going to do. I was going to throw a lot of fastballs, and good luck.
In '75, opposing hitters had little luck against Palmer and his arsenal. But this year's Orioles would need even more than that, as they faced an unexpected challenge from the Boston Red Sox.
The expectations for the Red Sox in '75, it's an okay club, second, third place club, maybe, if we're lucky.
The Red Sox hopes seemed to rest on the leadership of 15-year veteran Carl Yastrzemski, a former MVP and Triple Crown winner. And while no longer dominant, Yaz was still the face of the franchise.
Leader in the clubhouse, leader on the field. Meant a lot to us. He was paramount for us in '75.
The beloved Yaz led a feisty ball club that included battle-tested third baseman Rico Petrocelli, Dwight Evans, a strong-armed young right fielder, and a catcher named Carlton Pudge Fisk, who was not only one of the game's emerging young stars, but also one of New England's own.
Carlton Fisk, born in Vermont, raised in New Hampshire. The image of Fisk that you always have is striding out to the mound with that mask atop his head. And he had that great chin, that classic face, and he really did look like a medieval knight. He was a very, very powerful presence.
Fisk would need that presence to handle the Red Sox odd couple, pitching duo Luis Tiant and Bill Lee, otherwise known as the Spaceman.
Oh, he's crazy. He'd do his thing.
The eccentric Lee enjoyed befuddling hitters with his space ball, a tantalizing lob.
Look at that pitch. That pitch changed time zones coming up there was so slow.
But when it came to unconventional pitchers, the Red Sox Luis Tiant stood alone. In the 60s, El Tiante had been a standout flamethrower with the Cleveland Indians. But after hurting his arm, he'd been given up for dead. Then the Red Sox picked him up off the scrap heap, and he reinvented himself as the Houdini of the baseball diamond.
He had to change his style. He had to use guile to befuddle the hitters. And he learned this great twisting, winding motion, looking into center field before he contorted his body back and threw to the hitter.
Yeah, he doesn't ever look at the hitter, doesn't seem like, down on his toe, up at the sky.
He came up with curveballs, curveball over the top, sidearm, underhand, knuckleballs, everything.
On that slow outside curve.
Guys on the opposing team that would say something, hey, what are you doing, with that stuff? He'd say, hey, what you do? Yeah, you strike out.
And Louis gave the Fenway faithful not only his magic, but also his heart.
There'll be late innings and somebody's warming up and, Louis ahead by 1 run, a couple of guys on, manager come out and says, Louis, I'm gonna take you out. And he goes, you don't take me out. He would convince the manager that, no, I'm gonna get this guy out. And sure enough, he'd leave him in, bang, get the outs, go on to win a ball game. What a competitor.
With their colorful cast of characters, the Red Sox were exciting. But 2 standout rookies named Fred Lynn and Jim Rice suddenly made them dangerous. A hitting prodigy, Rice immediately became the most feared presence in the Boston lineup.
Jimmy, he had power. He had the biggest arms I had ever seen, and when Jimmy hit the ball, it made a different sound than everybody else.
And while Rice intimidated, Lynn amazed with his all-round brilliance.
Got it! Fine play by Fred Lynn.
There always someone comes along that really catches your eye, and Fred Lynn was one of those people. He could hit a ball a long way. He ran extremely well. He played the outfield with gusto. He made the greatest catches.
Lynn and Rice became known as the Gold Dust Twins and helped vault the Sox unexpectedly to the top of the East. But if the Red Sox were going to make a run of the pennant, they would have to face the gold standard in the West, the Oakland A's, who were running away with their division. And while they no longer had Catfish to anchor their rotation, their roster still read like an all-star team.
Raleigh Fingers and Holtzman, Vida Blue, Joe Rudy, Sal Bando, Campaneris at short. And go on and on with the players they had.
But of all of their stars, perhaps Reggie Jackson, the preeminent slugger in the American League, was the one who best embodied the spirit of the A's.
And he was the type of player who could go 0 for 3 and look bad, but he'd win the game on his 4th at bat by hitting a 3-run homer. Whatever pressure that might be in any particular game, Reggie could handle it.
Oakland was still the king of the baseball hill, and if anyone was going to knock them off, they were going to have to handle that pressure better than the battle-tested A's. In 1975, Andy Messersmith of the Los Angeles Dodgers was preparing to challenge baseball's reserve clause by playing the season without a contract. But one thing was certain, Messersmith didn't shortchange the Dodgers, as he led the National League in complete games, shutouts, and innings pitched.
He must be nearing the 200 mark and pitches strong.
Messersmith threw over 320 innings. Remarkably, Jim Palmer and Catfish Hunter both matched this incredible feat. They each won 23 games, and Palmer would lead the majors in ERA and shutouts, edging out Catfish for his second Cy Young Award.
It was the best year I ever had. And I would lose 11 times, but that was primarily because I think Catfish and I almost averaged 9 innings to start that year.
These great pitchers were classic examples of an era when starters were often closers as well.
A standing ovation for Tom Seaver.
Cincinnati Reds manager Sparky Anderson would defy this convention.
His philosophy from a pitching perspective was, if you can take me into the 6th inning with a lead, he was not going to let a starting pitcher lose the game.
Badger, I know you feel fine, and I know I'm not sure, Sparky. I know that, Badger, but I'm going to have to make a decision, and I'm going to make it like I always make.
Starting pitchers, frankly, did not like him.
Nice ball game going in.
And Sparky had the nickname of Captain Hook.
It was no surprise that Captain Hook's bullpen led the majors in saves and wins. For Sparky, the '75 season couldn't have turned out better. His Big Red Machine steamrolled the opposition, and they were led by a great player having his greatest year, as Joe Morgan became the first NL second baseman since Jackie Robinson in 1949 to win the MVP.
And it's out of here.
The thing that happened to me in '75, it seemed like every time the team needed something, I was the guy that was on the spot. And being the guy in those situations and coming through, that's what you dream about.
The Reds would end up winning the NL West by a whopping 20 games. But as powerful as they were, they still had competition for the league's most productive offense.
There's a long drive, that one's deep.
The '75 Pirates, who led the NL in slugging percentage and home runs, cruised to another Eastern Division title. Their year was highlighted by a 22-0 shellacking of the Chicago Cubs.
They pelted our pitching staff and scored in every inning to the first 8. And then they called down to the bullpen to this guy that we had just brought to the major leagues and said, get ready, you're going in the 9th. And he goes, you know what, my shoulder's a little sore. Pittsburgh was hitting everything. The guy wouldn't go in the game.
In the American League, the A's cruised to their 5th consecutive AL West title. But the big story was in the East, as Boston and their 2 brilliant rookies sizzled all season long.
Freddie Lynn, between him and Rice, forget about it. Those guys, were amazing.
The Gold Dust Twins became the first pair of rookies to hit over 300, slug over 20 homers, and drive in over 100 runs, as they helped carry the Red Sox past Baltimore to an AL Eastern crown.
Freddie Lynn.
Rice would finish 2nd in the Rookie of the Year voting and 3rd in the MVP race.
Jim Rice. And the fans stand up, pay him tribute. What a year.
While Lynn would make history as the first player ever to be named the Rookie of the Year and win the MVP award in the same season.
If Fred Lynn had a dive at 15 balls that year, he probably caught 14 of them. If he needed a double, he would hit it. If he needed a homer, he'd hit it. It was just one of the most fantastic years of anybody, not just a rookie, but anybody that I've been around.
Boston wasn't just the site of baseball's unprecedented feat in 1975. It was also home to its most heartwarming story, as Luis Tiant was reunited with his parents, whom he'd left behind in Cuba over a decade ago. Finally, in 1975, his parents were given permission to visit him in America.
Was the greatest thing in my life to see my mom in that game, because when I left Cuba, I thought I was never going to see him again.
Tiant's father had been a star pitcher in the Negro Leagues before baseball had integrated. And on an emotional night in Boston, he was honored at Fenway Park.
In that moment, I have my dream coming true for me. And everything coming that year all together.
75 had truly been a dream season for Boston. But if they were going to add a fairy tale ending, they would have to defeat the three-time defending world champion Oakland A's in the playoffs. The Reds entered the 75 playoffs with the most wins in the National League since 1909. But their postseason failures in 70, 72, and 73 made them wary.
They had to go out and prove that they were really something, because if they didn't win in 75, then people were going to say, I know this team could do well during the season, but always choked in the playoffs and the World Series.
But the Reds' opponents in the 1975 National League Championship Series had some demons of their own. Having lost to the Reds in the 70 and 72 playoffs, the Pittsburgh Pirates did not have history on their side.
For some reason, the Reds had their number, and I can remember that Doc Ellis, pitching for the Pirates, got so frustrated that in one game he hit the first three Reds batters and got thrown out of the game. But he did that because he thought his team was intimidated by the Reds.
From the start, the intimidation continued. Hitting and running at will, the Reds unleashed their total arsenal on Pittsburgh.
There they go. Seguin throws. It is not in time.
While the Pirate offense sputtered, thanks in large part to the Reds' defense.
Johnny Bench will make the play to first base. He gets out.
The disparity in the running game was a storyline in the series, as the Pirates did not steal a single base, while the Reds ran wild and were successful in all 11 of their attempts.
There he goes. Here's the throw. It is not in time. There he goes. No way Seguin can get him.
Cincinnati swept the Pirates and now set their sights on ditching the title as the greatest team never to win a championship.
We celebrate because we had the chance to go in the World Series and trying to win one, the first one. That's a big red machine.
The Reds' opponents would be the winner of the A's-Red Sox series. But with Boston's rookie slugger, Jim Rice, out with a broken wrist, the Sox faced steep odds against the three-time defending champs, who were brimming with confidence.
Do you feel the A's experience is going to be a big factor in this?
Well, Tony, there's no question about it. I know facts are facts. The sky's blue and the sun's shining.
The Red Sox would counter the A's experience by sending Luis Tiant to the mound for Game 1.
You couldn't ask for a better big game pitcher than Luis Tiant.
And Tiant lived up to his reputation by shutting down Oakland. With Louis leading the charge, the rest of the Sox fell in line.
Fisk going to try and lean in. He's got it.
And the A's couldn't stop them. It had taken an entire season for the champs to finally miss Catfish. But without their big game pitcher, Oakland's championship veneer cracked, and Boston was the team that thrived under the pressure.
1 through 9, everybody hit. I remember hitting like 350, and there was like 10 guys ahead of me that hit better.
That ball is a home run.
We, as a team, just clubbed them.
The Sox would dethrone Oakland in a stunning and decisive 3-game sweep.
When the last out was made, I wasn't really thinking about how we'd beaten the past champs. I was already anticipating playing on the big stage, and I was saying to myself, man, we're in the World Series.
As the 1975 World Series sat to open at Fenway Park, it was obvious to all how Boston and their 95 wins measured up to the Big Red Machine and their 108.
Red Sox fans went to the ballpark with the feeling is, hey, we're just really glad to be here. We hope it goes 4.
I sat in on some of the pitchers and catchers meetings, so all we heard about is how you can't do these things to their hitters because they'll kill you. And I'm thinking, man, where are you going to pitch these guys? You can't do this, you can't do that. What are you going to do?
What Boston would do was hand the ball to Luis Tiant.
There's his hesitation pass. Look at Pete. Pete says, what was that? What was that?
And with his father looking on from the stands, El Tiante began to dismantle the Big Red Machine.
Choo-choo pitch on the way. Sidearm struck him out.
He had them in knots. He just dominated them, and I didn't think anybody could do that.
And as if shutting down the Big Red Machine wasn't enough, Luis started the game-winning rally.
He gets a base hit. They love him here, don't they? Standing ovation for Louis. I'm sure he remembers.
And Tiant's approach on the bases mirrored his style on the mound. Unorthodox and entertaining, but ultimately effective.
He stopped him.
He almost got in a run down between second and third. He finally scored a run, and I remember he missed home plate, and Fisk was telling him to go back and touch home plate.
He didn't tag home. He didn't tag home. He went back to the right.
It was comical.
Tiant had almost single-handedly delivered the Sox a victory and a message that Boston was willing to do whatever it took to make this a series.
Louis Tiant spins a 5-hit shutout. Boy, you pitched one marvelous ball game today under extreme pressure.
I think now we let them more free. And yes, we have to go over there and play the game the way we're supposed to play. And I know we can beat these guys.
In Game 2, the pressure was squarely on the Reds, and the Sox kept it on them by playing flawlessly.
To center field, Lynn coming on. Got it! Fine play by Fred Lynn.
Boston took a one-run lead into the ninth and then found themselves one out away from putting the heavily favored Reds in a two-game hole.
2 down, 2-1 Red Sox in the ninth.
But the Reds had the tying run at third, and their hopes riding on Davy Concepcion.
In comes Grego. There's a bounding ball. It's going to be maybe a tie game. It is. Bench scores to tie it up for Cincinnati. A big infield hit by Dave Concepcion.
And when Ken Griffey followed with a run-scoring double, the Reds had a dramatic come-from-behind victory they hoped would change the momentum of the series. And back in Cincinnati, it seemed like it would, as they took a 2-run lead into the ninth inning of Game 3.
Side drive to left field. Back near the wall goes Foster. At the wall. He can't get it. The game is tied up.
Dwight Evans' 2-run homer sent the game into extra innings and set the stage for one of the most controversial plays in World Series history. With the score tied at 5 and a runner at first, Reds pinch hitter Ed Armbrister was sent up to sacrifice.
Armbrister waiting, squares around, punts it in front of the plate. Fisk is going to go to second. The throw is high into center field. Geronimo heads for third. Here's the throw, and it's not in time. And now they're claiming interference.
He was interfering, and you went to call it.
The ruling on this is whether he intends to interfere or not. It's interference. Wrong call. Wrong call.
If the Reds had received a break, it didn't take them long to capitalize.
Deep to center field. It'll be over Lynn's head. This game is over. Cincinnati wins it.
Tough way to lose a game. Tough way to lose a game.
In the fourth game, Boston would send El Tiante back to the mound to try and even the series. And although Louis couldn't repeat his shutout performance of Game 1, he did manage to nurse a 5-4 lead into the ninth inning through sheer will.
He is battling. He's got a battle on his hands.
In the ninth inning, Tiant was exhausted and in trouble.
Darryl Johnson came out to the mound, was going to take Louis out, and Louis said, "This is my game."
What do you guys think? I got a left-hander down here, Louis. Can you get him? All right. Get after him good. Come on.
With 2 out and the tying and winning runs on base, Tiant got ready to deliver his 155th pitch of the game to Joe Morgan, with the role of hero still to be determined.
The pitch and the runner goes. That is a pop-up to the right side. Yastrzemski makes the catch as the Red Sox mob Louis Tiant.
Louis Tiant stood on the mound and willed himself to a victory and forever enshrined himself in Red Sox lore.
After 3 straight one-run cliffhangers, the Reds finally got an easy win in Game 5, powered by 2 home runs from Tony Perez. Through 5 games, the Reds and the Sox had already played a classic series. But as they headed back to Boston with Cincinnati up 3-2, they were about to play what many consider the greatest game of all time. Game 6 of the 75 series was scheduled to resume on October 18th.
Coming back for this World Series here in Boston, it's been rain, 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 and rain.
We got rained out in Boston 3 or 4 days, and because of that, it's probably the only World Series in the history of World Series competition that had a Super Bowl flavor.
Finally, on October 21st, the weather cleared and Game 6 was played. Leading 3-2, the Reds were on the verge of a title. But the rain clouds had come with a silver lining for Boston. The chance to start Luis Tiant in a game they had to win. And while Tiant began mowing down the Reds, Fred Lynn staked him to an early lead.
And there's a high fly ball deep to right field. Forget it. It's gone. Red Sox lead it 3-0.
The score stayed that way until the 5th, when the Reds finally began to hit Tiant. Louis had frustrated them for 2.5 games, but now he would feel their wrath. And by the 8th inning, the Big Red Machine had knocked him out and taken a 6-3 lead.
And Cincinnati getting closer to a World Championship.
With the Reds' vaunted bullpen protecting it, Cincinnati's 3-run lead seemed more than safe. When the Sox sent up ex-Red Bernie Carbo to pinch hit in the bottom of the 8th with 2 on and 2 out.
Bernie Carbo was our #1 draft choice ahead of Johnny Bench.
But after a disappointing career with the Reds, Carbo was now merely a part-time player for the Sox.
And there's a sense in the park that people thought the season had been spent. That with Bernie Carbo's appearance, that perhaps it was time to put the storm windows on and get ready for winter.
2-2 pitch. Deep center field, way back. We're tied up.
Carbo's shocking game-tying blast had saved Boston's season and turned Fenway into a house of bedlam. Then, in the bottom of the 9th, with the score still tied, Freddie Lynn stepped to the plate with the bases loaded and nobody out. All he needed was a fly ball to score Denny Doyle from third.
I'm coaching third base, and I said to Denny Doyle, anything that's up in the air to the outfield, I'm going down the line, you tag up and watch me.
There it is. High fly ball, left field.
When this ball was hit, it was too short, so I said, you can't go anywhere. And all of a sudden, I see Doyle break for home, and I said, no, no, no.
Denny, crowd noise and everything, thinks he hears from the third base coach Zimmer, go, go, go.
They're tagging up at third. Here comes the throw. It is in time.
He's out at the plate. They go on to extra innings.
Cincinnati had escaped certain defeat. And then in the 11th inning, Joe Morgan looked to seize the moment for the Reds.
Well hit, right field, deep. Evans is going back near the wall, and oh, what a catch he made! What a catch by Dwight Evans!
I lost the ball from here to here. I throw the glove behind me, and it ends up in my glove. No one's more surprised than me.
Game 6 had almost everything except an ending. And in the bottom of the 12th inning, with the score still tied, the Red Sox would look to provide one.
Pudge and I were in the on-deck circle, and he says, I'm going to get on and you knock me in.
But as Carlton Pudge Fisk stepped up to the plate, he would change the plan.
Here's Fisk. There it goes, the ball drive. If it stays fair, home run. Carlton Fisk. We will have a 7th game.
And that ball went up over that fence while we all jumped up and down like a bunch of crazy people.
Fisk's dramatic home run had not only won the game, but his iconic moment would secure his place in baseball history.
It was one of the greatest home runs ever hit.
Didn't know it was going to be fair or foul. I knew if it was fair, it was out of here. They are just dancing in the streets here.
All of New England goes berserk. church bells peal from St. Johnsbury, Vermont to Provincetown, Massachusetts. What an incredible night.
I saw their jubilation after they went to Game 6. That was only Game 6. I mean, you know, they made it 3-3. And I told Sparky, I said, don't worry about it, Sparky. We got them right where we want them.
Pete, another game tonight. It's one season, right down to one game. Good luck to you.
Well, we started 8 months ago, February 22nd, and here we are October 22nd, and all the money's on the line, and all the glory's on the line, and we're playing for them diamond rings.
The '75 World Series had come down to one game, one last chance for the Big Red Machine to finally achieve greatness, or for the Red Sox to pull off a landmark upset.
We go into Game 7 really, really high emotionally and confident.
And Boston's confidence seemed justified as they raced out to a 3-0 lead.
Another run across. Red Sox lead 3-0.
And then watched Bill Lee make it stand up through 5 innings.
3-2 pitch.
You know, if you're a home team and you're in Game 7 of World Series, you got a 3-0 lead in the 5th inning, you got to shut the door and get the ring, man.
With the Reds' hopes fading, Tony Perez came to the plate in the 6th inning with a man on. Earlier, Lee had fooled him with his space ball.
Slow, eephus curveball. Perez wanted nothing of it.
Now the spaceman made the fateful decision to throw the Reds' most prolific RBI man another one.
There's his blooper pitch. There it is. He's waiting for that one. That one is gone. And now we have another one-run ball game in this World Series.
Perez's homer would change the game's momentum, and fittingly, the teams would enter the 9th inning tied. Then with 2 outs and the go-ahead run at third base, Joe Morgan looked for the perfect ending to his dream season.
There's a looper. They drop. It's in for a hit, and the Reds have the lead 4-3.
I just couldn't get there. God, it was frustrating. You know, it felt like it was slow motion to me. I could see it. I thought I could get to it. I got it on hop. Ended up being a game winner.
And Cincinnati has won the World Championship, beating the Boston Red Sox 4-3.
After years of frustration, the Big Red Machine finally had their championship title.
We found out what really winning was all about and what it meant to be a world champion by going into the locker room, and everybody was a world champion. It was very special.
One of the best World Series of modern times.
For the Red Sox, there would be no champagne, but they could take solace in knowing that for 7 magical games, they had taken the great Reds to the limit and shown the best that baseball had to offer.
The Red Sox, in all of Major League Baseball, won the 1975 World Series.
The '75 World Series is still remembered today as one of the greatest ever played. As for the Big Red Machine, they would win again the following year, cementing their place in history as one of baseball's best teams. The team they supplanted, the Oakland A's, would soon be dismantled by their owner, Charlie Finley. And despite the crushing loss in the series, the '75 Sox would become part of Boston lore as one of the franchise's most beloved teams, and as a dramatic addition to their long story of near misses. But one player would have the most enduring impact. Andy Messersmith would successfully challenge the owners and the reserve clause and win the right to free agency, ushering in a new era in Major League Baseball.